Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair. It's our 8th anniversary! I am still utterly baffled that I've somehow managed to keep this show running near continuously for the last 8 years. I can't think of anything I've done this frequently, except for key biological functions like sleeping, eating, etc. I know I always say how grateful I am that you guys are still watching after all this time, and while I really am grateful, and I want you to know I do appreciate that people are watching it, I think I'd still be doing this even if no one was watching. I might have gotten into this for the sake of becoming internet famous, but the reason I'm still here is that I genuinely like doing it and have a passion for it. I'd go on, but this is another one of those double milestone years, so I'll save some of my allotted ego trip for the 200th episode. What we're here to talk about today is Doctor Who. This year we've reached the end of the Target novelizations and the beginning of what is known in the fandom as the Wilderness Years, aka the period between 1989 and 2005, when Doctor Who wasn't around on TV, and they had a bunch of false starts, including one that I plan on tackling next year, before we jump ahead to the 9th Doctor. But this false start is different in that it was actually an official Doctor. In the 90s, Philip Siegel, a TV producer, wanted to bring back Doctor Who in America, but the only network that bit, Fox, was only interested in a single made-for-TV movie. Amid various production problems, the film actually managed to get made in 1996, debuting about a month or so ahead of yours truly, starring Paul McGann in the title role. But Doctor Who wasn't the international phenomenon that it would become today, and so it failed to garner enough interest to get a full season order. But McGann was popular enough that Big Finish and BBC Books picked up the slack and produced audio dramas and novels featuring the 8th Doctor, until the show's eventual return in 2005 heralded a new era. McGann still does the audio dramas to this day, and he even got a chance to properly regenerate in 2013 on screen. And amidst all the novels, BBC Books got their start with a novelization of his first and at the time, only on-screen appearance. The good thing about this novelization is that due to the fact that it was a regeneration story, it means that I don't have to explain the characters, since the novelization is supposed to handle that. What I will say is that if you haven't heard his Big Finished audio drama appearances, rectify that immediately. They're, to borrow a turn of phrase from his successor, fantastic. My personal recommendations are The Chimes of Midnight and The Centauran Ordeal. Anyway, let's set our TARDIS controls and get into Doctor Who the movie, the novelization, The Enemy Within. I really miss Doctor Who in the blank. The cover is okay. I'll admit I usually hate photo covers, but for this one I'm willing to make an exception, because by this point, novelizations were starting to become less important with a home video market and such, especially for Doctor Who, so they needed to cash in as much as they could on the movie. Plus, it's at least not some generic stock publicity photo of the 8th Doctor just standing there. He's actually doing a somewhat dynamic pose, trying to slip into the TARDIS. Apart from that, we see the Doctor Who logo, my particular favorite logo, the tagline, "He's back and it's about time," which is a really bad pun, but I like bad puns, so I'll allow it. And at the bottom, we get the BBC Books logo, since by this point, Target went the way of the dodo. Not that one. And BBC Books had the book rights for Doctor Who. But they didn't lose the talent that Target and Virgin had established, since the book is written by Gary Russell, best known for being one of the most prolific expanded universe Doctor Who writers, with stuff published by Virgin, BBC Books, Big Finish, and IDW, among others. The back cover gives us a very long blurb and has little images of the Doctor, Grace, and the Master, in addition to telling us the actors who played them in the film. Not my favorite cover ever, and less interesting than Target's offerings, but it's not the worst that I've seen for licensed works. Let's get to the story. The book, unlike the movie, gives us some well-needed backstory for the film, and for the Doctor, establishing that the Seventh Doctor has been alone for a while, which we all know is never good, and explains why the console room had taken on a more gothic appearance, explaining that in his boredom, the Doctor had changed the desktop theme repeatedly before settling on it. Not entirely consistent with Big Finish, but I'll allow it. There's also great visual exposition, explaining the position of everything in the room, which, while boring for some, is delightful for a Doctor Who fan, since we care about such things. While whizzing about the time vortex, the Doctor receives a telepathic message from the Master, explaining that he'd been captured by the Daleks and put on trial, which isn't the usual MO of the Daleks, but let's see where they're going. The Daleks are angry that the Master keeps joining forces with them, only to betray them in the end. Not gonna lie, this doesn't seem like high tribunal material to me. Feels more like small claims. What you are about to witness is real. The participants are not actors. These are the plaintiffs, the Daleks, who contend that the defendant has entered into several verbal alliances and always betrays them, causing a breach of contract. They are seeking a sentence of execution for the defendant's crimes against the Daleks. This is the defendant, the Master. He says that the plaintiffs have continually sought for the destruction of all non-Dalek existence, and so has only been working for the greater good by betraying them and not his own personal gain. He's accused of being a megalomaniac out only for himself. Both parties have agreed to drop their case and settle it here, in the alien's court. I wonder what Legal Eagle would have to say about that trial. Unfortunately, because this is a Dalek trial, it's pretty open and shut, so the Master is exterminated. But he makes a final request before death that the Doctor would ferry his remains back to Gallifrey. And because the Doctor and the Master have a strange relationship, the Doctor agrees. And Russell manages to add logic to it, by establishing that it wasn't an official request and the Daleks didn't just hand him the ashes. He had to sneak in and grab them since he's their sworn enemy. He uses his sonic screwdriver to inter the remains, just residue and a pair of crystallized eyes, in a small casket and sets the coordinates to Gallifrey before the TARDIS malfunctions and instigates the emergency landing, due to the Master's remains taking the form of a gooseneck, slipping out of the casket and infiltrating the TARDIS controls. The Doctor realizes the danger and the liability of bringing the Master aboard, and sets off to locate him as the TARDIS lands in San Francisco 1999, a few days shy of the new millennium, where Chang Li is rethinking his life choices as he runs away from a rival street gang. See, Li had once been a promising kid working at his parents' Chinese restaurant, but his brother Chang Ho had joined a gang and tried to get their father to let him sell crack from the back room to appease the Triad gangs. Mr. Chang refused, and a Triad gang shot and killed him and his wife, leaving Li and Ho as orphans. Ho was later killed in a gangland firefight, leaving Chang Li in service to the gangs, because that was his only option in Chinatown if he wanted to survive. Not that he was happy about it, of course.
I should have gone to law school like my old man wanted.
As they run, Lee's buddies are gunned down, but Lee is spared because of the opportune appearance of the TARDIS materializing in front of him. Unfortunately, it's not quite as opportunistic for the Doctor, since instead of checking the scanner, he instead just flings the door wide open and walks out, getting gunned down by the gang. The Doctor tries to warn Lee about the Master, but Lee ignores him, worrying about the cops showing up, as the Master escapes through the keyhole. The Doctor is brought to the hospital, with Lee tagging along to alleviate suspicions that he was part of the shooting, and Dr. Grace Holloway is called in from a night at the opera. Unfortunately, this night at the opera doesn't quite have anything nearly as hilarious as the stateroom scene. Can anyone else go for a hard-boiled egg right now? Make that 2 hard-boiled eggs. Grace operates, but because they don't know about the doctor's binary vascular system, he dies on the table. The anesthetic slowing the regenerative process so that he doesn't regenerate until after his body is moved to the morgue, scaring the absolute crap out of the orderly working there. Interesting fact, a lot of people weren't sure until the 8th Doctor's face appeared in John Smith's journal in Human Nature, the Family of Blood, that the 8th Doctor was canon and hadn't taken place in some alternative universe. An easy assumption to make, given that the orderly in the morgue is Gomez Calhoun from Sliders, the surefire way to know you were in a screwy parallel world. Clearly, though, this is the darkest timeline, since the Dominion Hotel has turned into a hospital on this slide. Grace tries to get info about the Doctor from Lee, but Lee just steals the Doctor's things and runs off, leaving Grace trying to find out what killed her patient. The Doctor raids the hospital locker like he'd done back in his 3rd incarnation in the first novelization we covered on this show, and would later do in his 11th. The next morning, after hearing that the body went missing, the hospital administrator tries to cover it up by erasing all evidence that the Doctor had ever been a patient, and Grace quits in protest, adding another slice of crap to her already crappy life, since after the opera incident, her boyfriend broke up with her. He broke up with a doctor for being on call. This feels like one of those our relationship advice posts that just boil down to all the advice being throw the whole man away. Meanwhile, the Master has taken over the body of the ambulance driver Bruce and has killed Bruce's wife before he heads off to find the Doctor. As for the Doctor, he's tracked down Grace and convinced her of his identity, while the Master enlists Lee to help capture the Doctor by lying and saying that their relationship is reversed, and steal his remaining regenerations before Bruce's body decays. The Master tells Lee that the Doctor stole his body and promises Lee riches in exchange for his assistance. He uses Lee to open the Eye of Harmony, that both reveals a secret of the Doctor's to the Master and restores the Doctor's memories. Oh, and the secret?
I'm half human. On my mother's side.
A fact that is never mentioned again on screen, and most tie-in media implies that it was part of the Doctor's gambit to defeat the Master. In order to fix the TARDIS's timing malfunction, the Doctor needs to borrow tech from the most advanced atomic clock on the planet, which happens to be in San Francisco, counting down to midnight, and the location is the site of a party that Grace happens to be invited to. I'd argue that this is a major set of plot contrivances, but I'll allow it since one of the first Doctor Who episodes that I ever watched stated that the TARDIS brings the Doctor where he needs to go, so I guess the TARDIS's landing was intentional. However, Grace is really flip-floppy on whether she believes the Doctor's stories, being cool with it one second and snapping back to sanity the next, and intends to have the Doctor committed. The Master, using Bruce's body to trick Grace, manages to convince them to get into the ambulance, the Doctor believing that he's going to the clock, and Grace thinking they're going to the mental hospital. They hit traffic, and the Master reveals himself, spraying Grace's wrist with acid goop, and the Doctor and Grace head to the Institute. After using future knowledge for some key personal gain to help a future seismologist and get out with the piece of tech he needed, the Doctor and Grace hightail it to the TARDIS. The Doctor starts to get to work fixing it, while the Master psychically controls Grace because of the acid spit. The Doctor closes the eye, but has to do some technobabble to reverse the damage it already did, and the Master captures the Doctor with Grace and Lee's help. After a costume change, because
I always dress for the occasion.
The Master tries to steal the Doctor's body, but because he's a chatty incarnation, the Doctor is able to spin the conversation around and have the Master reveal that not only will the Master destroy the Earth, meaning that Lee's motivator, becoming rich, won't matter, but that the Master is a big fat liar, so Lee turns face, for all the good it did him, because the Master just snaps his neck. Without Lee to reopen the eye, the Master is forced to reverse his hypnosis on Grace, and uses her eyes. The Master starts to take over the Doctor's body, but Grace is able to rush to the console room and activate the Doctor's technobabble, putting the TARDIS into temporal orbit. Grace goes back to free the Doctor, but the Master kills her right after she does. In a scuffle, the Master falls into the Eye of Harmony and refuses the Doctor's hand of mercy, choosing to die instead. And I'm sure we'll never see the Master ever again. Okay, but we'll never see the Eric Roberts Master ever again. Huh. Anyway, the TARDIS returns to normal time and space, and Grace and Lee are saved by TARDIS energy, reviving them like Pokemon tears. Lee gets to keep his promised payment, and the Doctor gives Grace a chance to go traveling with him, but she refuses. "I'm sorry, Doctor, but the rights to my character are so mixed up in studio red tape that I'll only ever get to appear in the comics." They simply kiss, and the newly minted Doctor is off again, towards his next adventure. And maybe a pot of tea. I could go into all the problems that the movie had, and there are a lot, trust me, but we're not really here to talk about the movie. We're here to talk about how well it was translated into a novelization, and to that end, it was done really well. The novelization does a lot of hard work to explain most of the dumber plot elements, like explaining why Grace was so quick to quit her extremely profitable job over a single ethical issue. While the film only tells us that,
But it was a childish dream that made you a doctor.
in the book, we're shown that Grace's mother died of cancer, and Grace became a doctor to ensure that no child would have to lose their parent like she did. So when faced with an unbelievable and unexplainable death, Grace wants to figure out how to prevent it from happening, which the hospital administrator, who reminds me a lot of Mike D'Angelo from Aftermath, refuses to allow after the body goes missing because bad PR, hence her quitting. Unfortunately, because Russell was working with the script of the movie, he couldn't fix everything. Even more so since he had limited visual reference, so a lot of little things are slightly different. Mostly just character appearances that likely changed between script and screen. Grace's constant flip-flopping over whether she's a party to the Doctor's shenanigans is just as infuriating here as it was on screen. I know that films have to do that third act reversal where the hero loses some ground, but the Doctor pulled a friggin' probe out of his chest and walked through a glass window like it was Jell-O. The time for rationality is over. But I will admit, it was nice to have a companion who doesn't just hop on board with all the craziness like a lot of the modern companions have done, where they just get acclimated right when the shock of the TARDIS interior wears off. There's also some good backstory on Bruce, not that we really see that much of him anyway, since he spends most of the movie as the Master, but it's nice to find out that he was a genuinely good person before he was taken over. It makes the Master's deeds all the more evil. There's a lot more backstory in general of all the side characters, which makes it worth it to read to get the world slightly more fleshed out, more about Grace, more about Chang Li. There's also a lot more in-jokes and Easter eggs to the past of the show. Russell describes the new TARDIS interior having a pond full of Gumballjacks, for instance. When the Master and Lee track the Doctor down to it using the Eye of Harmony, Lee is shown all 7 of the Doctor's previous incarnations, and the Doctor retains his straw hat, having found it in the hospital lockers. For some reason. I don't know, maybe one of the orderlies is trying to put together a 7th Doctor cosplay? Which is where he got the jelly babies until the end when he hands it off to Grace, essentially being a narrative hint that the 8th Doctor had finally taken form and was no longer his previous incarnation. It's stuff like that, while understandably left out of the movie since it would confuse new viewers, that makes the novelization stand out compared to the film. Gary Russell has a great handle on the characters. The Doctor and the Master are perfectly in character, despite the movie featuring 2 completely new incarnations. The Master seems to be a cherry-picking of all the hammiest elements of the previous Masters, and is perfectly in character. The Doctor, unfortunately, doesn't have much of a character because he spends half the movie without his memories, and the other half is just sort of manic and crazy, and he's not really given a chance to shine, hence why the Big Finish stuff is so important, because it fleshes out who the 8th Doctor is, using the movie as a springboard. But Gary Russell not only has a great handle on the characters, unsurprising considering his history with the franchise, but he also uses italics or quotes to great effect to show the lines with emphasis that the actors put on in the movie, such as,
I thought you were a doctor!
I thought you were a doctor!
most novelizations, including so many of the Target novelizations, will lose the effectiveness of the actors because of the unique spin that the actors put on the characters on screen. But Russell never loses that uniqueness because he gives it the same emphasis. And given that the book came out before the movie, that is an accomplishment. The only problem is that Like the movie, the story is convoluted and sometimes really hard to follow, in addition to introducing some plot elements that I'm not completely in love with, like the half-human thing. Boy, am I glad that Doctor Who doesn't do major retcons like that anymore. Considering that I had no idea that stuff like this was gonna happen when I started making book reviews in 2012, this is impeccably good timing. I will say that, like the movie, the pacing is sort of off. In addition to Grace's flip-flopping, some things are crazily rushed, like the ending, while other things drag out, like the trip to the Institute. But it's balanced out by giving us things the movie never could have, like having the Master's form decay as the story progresses, essentially ending up a crispy husk by the end, which we never saw because Eric Roberts had some sort of issue with the makeup. Doctor Who, the novel of the film, is a brilliant novelization. It does everything that a good novelization is supposed to do. It takes what we saw on screen, expands on it in a meaningful way, and adds in elements that either explain, or at the very least justify, some of the things that the movie just expected us to take at face value. And Russell was the perfect choice to handle writing it. The book more than justifies its existence, and for that merit, along with just how enjoyable it is, I can't help but recommend it. If you've seen the movie, it is a great reference for getting a far more substantial story with all the in-jokes and Easter eggs that you expect from Doctor Who. And if you haven't, this is by far the superior way to experience the story, since it allows you to visualize the things that we didn't get to see, like the Master's decaying form. Either way, check this book out if you can find a copy, because it's definitely one of the best Doctor Who novelizations out there, warts and all. The movie isn't great, but the novelization more than makes up for all the film's shortcomings. Well, most of them. Some of them. Anyway, thank you all for watching not only this video, but every video I've made for the last 8 years. Still shocking, of this wonderfully stupid book review show that I have here, and I hope you'll keep watching for 8 more years. Or longer. At least stick around till the 200th episode, which is going to happen later this year. Gonna be a good time. See you next time. See, on the one hand, the 8th Doctor's cravat is just kind of hanging out all floppy or whatever, but on the other hand, he's not wearing a vest, so I probably should tuck it in. But I mean, this just objectively looks stupid.